The fluorescent bulb in Mr. Henderson's office flickered twice before dying completely, leaving us in the pale grey light filtering through the dusty blinds. Somehow that felt appropriate. 19 years I'd spent at Oak Ridge Boys' Home, and this was how it ended. A cardboard box with my belongings, a folder of documents, and a handshake from a man who'd seen too many kids like me walk out this door with nowhere to go. I'd turned 19 2 weeks ago, which meant the state was officially done with me. They didn't care that I had no family waiting outside, no college acceptance letters tucked in my pocket, no plan beyond hoping I could find a job at the shipping warehouse downtown. Mr. Henderson pushed the folder across his metal desk, the scraping sound loud in the quiet room. "These are your official documents, Marcus," he said, his voice carrying that rehearsed sympathy that came from doing this speech dozens of times. "Birth certificate, medical history, educational records, everything the state has on file regarding your background." I already knew what was in there, or rather what wasn't. I'd been left outside a police station when I was maybe 2 days old, wrapped in a blue towel with no note, no name, nothing. Just a screaming infant that nobody wanted. The cops who found me gave me the last name Rivers because I was found on River Street. Creative, right? I flipped through the folder anyway because sitting in silence felt worse. Standard forms, shot records, report cards documenting my thoroughly average journey through the system. Then, tucked into the back pocket of the folder, I saw something I'd never noticed before. A manila envelope sealed, with my name written across the front in faded blue ink. "What's this?" I asked, holding it up to the dim light. Mr. Henderson squinted at it, then pulled his reading glasses from his shirt pocket. That's odd. Let me see." He took it from me, examining the envelope closely. "There's a notation here on the back. Says it was to be given to you upon departure from state care. Must have been filed with your intake paperwork and never processed properly. You know how disorganized the system was back in 2005. My hands felt clammy as he handed it back. I tore open the envelope carefully and inside found a single sheet of lined paper, the kind torn from a spiral notebook, and something small and metallic that clinked when the envelope shifted. The handwriting on the paper was messy, rushed, like someone had written it in a hurry or under stress. "For Marcus when he's old enough. I couldn't keep you, but I made sure you'd have something. The ranch is yours if you want it. Reads in the county records under your birth name, Marcus William Cartwright. Property taxes paid through 2025. Key to the gate is enclosed. It's 40 miles north of Ridgemont, Wyoming. Old Miller Ranch Road. Nobody wanted it after Dad died, but maybe you will. I'm sorry I couldn't be what you needed, your mother, Lynn." I read it 3 times, trying to process what I was looking at. A ranch. She'd left me a ranch. And a name. Marcus William Cartwright. That was my real name, not the one the state had given me. Mr. Henderson was reading over my shoulder, his eyebrows raised. "Well, that's unexpected. Do you want me to make some calls? Verify this information?" I shook my head slowly, reaching into the envelope to pull out the key. It was old, brass, attached to a cracked leather keychain stamped with the words Miller Ranch. The metal was worn smooth in places from years of use. "No," I said quietly. "I'll check it out myself." That night, I lay awake in the narrow bed I'd slept in since I was 8, staring at the water-stained ceiling tiles and listening to the sounds of the nearly empty dormitory. Most of the other guys had already left, scattered to relatives or halfway houses or the streets. The building felt like a tomb, and I couldn't wait to leave it behind. I held the key up to the moonlight coming through the barred window, studying every scratch and worn edge. Miller Ranch. 40 miles north of Ridgemont, Wyoming. I'd never heard of either place, but suddenly they represented something I'd never had before. A connection. Proof that I'd come from somewhere. That someone had thought about me, even if they hadn't stuck around. The next morning, I packed my entire life into a duffel bag and a backpack. 4 changes of clothes, toiletries, the blue towel I'd been found in, because throwing it away felt like erasing evidence, the folder of documents, and the key. I'd saved $340 from working in the home's kitchen over the past 2 years. money I'd planned to use for a security deposit on some basement apartment. Now I had a different destination. Before I left, I stopped by the common room where a handful of younger kids were watching cartoons on the old television. They barely glanced up when I waved. I understood. In a place like this, people leaving was just part of the routine. Getting attached to anyone was a mistake you only made once. I walked out the front doors into the cool March morning, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on my shoulders, but also something else, something that felt almost like hope, which was dangerous. Hope had a way of making disappointment hurt worse. But I had a key, a name, and an address. It was more than I'd ever had before, so I decided to follow it and see where it led. I walked 6 blocks to the Greyhound station, my breath fogging in the cold air. Inside, the terminal smelled like burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. A tired-looking woman behind the counter barely looked up when I approached. "How much for a ticket to Ridgemont, Wyoming?" I asked. She typed on her keyboard, chewing gum with her mouth open. "One way, $67. I counted out the bills carefully, watching my savings shrink. Yeah, one way. The bus ride took 11 hours, including 2 transfers and a 40-minute delay in some nowhere town where the driver had to wait for a replacement part. I spent most of the journey pressed against the window, watching the landscape transform from urban sprawl to endless stretches of brown grassland and distant mountains. Wyoming looked nothing like the city I'd grown up in. Everything here felt bigger, emptier, like the world had room to breathe. The few towns we passed through were small, just clusters of buildings hugging the highway before disappearing back into the vastness. I'd never seen so much open space in my life. It made me feel simultaneously insignificant and somehow more real. Like maybe out here I could be whoever I wanted, instead of just another system kid with no past. The bus finally rolled into Ridgemont just after 7 in the evening. The station was barely a station at all. Just a covered bench outside a gas station with a faded Greyhound sign bolted to the wall. I stepped off the bus with my bags, and the driver pulled away before I'd even gotten my bearings, leaving me standing alone in the parking lot as the sun dropped toward the horizon. Ridgemont was small, maybe 3,000 people if I had to guess. Main Street stretched for about 6 blocks, lined with the kinds of businesses that had probably been there for decades. A hardware store, a diner called Betty's Place, a feed store, a bank, and a bar with neon signs in the window. Pickup trucks were parked diagonally along the curb, and a few people walked along the sidewalks, most of them wearing jeans and work boots. Nobody gave me a second glance, which was fine by me. I walked into Betty's Place because I was starving and because I figured someone there might know about Miller Ranch. The inside was warm and smelled like fried onions and coffee. Red vinyl booths lined the windows, and a long counter ran along one side with stools that looked like they'd been sat on by generations of locals. A woman, who must have been Betty, based on her name tag, looked up from wiping down the counter. She was maybe 60, with short grey hair and a face that had seen enough of life to not be surprised by much. "Grab a seat anywhere, hun," she called out. "I'll be right with you." I slid into a booth near the back and set my bags on the seat beside me. A laminated menu was tucked between the napkin dispenser and the salt shaker, advertising burgers and breakfast served all day. My stomach growled just reading it. Betty came over with a pot of coffee and a mug. "You passing through or looking for work?" she asked, pouring without waiting for an answer. "Neither, I think," I said. "I'm trying to find a place called Miller Ranch. It's supposed to be about 40 miles north of here." Her hand paused mid-pour, just for a second, but I noticed. "Miller Ranch," she repeated, setting the coffee pot down. "Now that's a name I haven't heard in a while. That old place has been sitting empty for, probably 15 years now, ever since William Miller passed. Why are you looking for it?" I pulled the key from my pocket and set it on the table. "I think it might have been left to me, by my mother. Her note said it was mine if I wanted it." Betty picked up the key, turning it over in her weathered hands. Her expression softened. "William Miller's daughter was named Lynn. She left town when she was about 17, maybe 18. got pregnant and took off, and William never spoke much about what happened. Broke his heart, from what I heard. He worked that ranch alone for years after his wife died, just waiting, I think, hoping Lynn would come back. She handed the key back to me. She never did, though. William died about 15 years ago, and the county tried to auction the property for back taxes, but your note says taxes are paid, so someone must have been handling that. The land's no good for much, too rocky, and the water rights are limited, so nobody wanted to buy it. It's just been sitting there, going to seed. Lynn. My mother's name was Lynn, and William Miller was my grandfather. The information settled over me like a weight. Do you know how to get there? I asked. Betty nodded. Take Highway 14 north for about 35 miles, then turn left on Old Miller Ranch Road. It's easy to miss, the sign's half fallen down. Follow that road for another 5 miles or so, and you'll see the gate. Ranch is another mile past that. She studied me for a moment. You planning to go out there tonight? It'll be dark soon, and that road's not maintained. Easy to get lost. I shook my head. Tomorrow morning, is there a motel in town? Ridgemont Inn, 2 blocks down. Clean enough. Tell Dale at the desk that Betty sent you. He'll give you the weekly rate even for 1 night. She smiled slightly. You look like you could use a break, kid. How old are you, anyway? 19. And you came all the way out here on a maybe? I shrugged. It was the only lead I had. She nodded like that made perfect sense. Well, welcome to Ridgemont, Marcus. Order whatever you want. First meal's on the house. Anyone brave enough to chase down a ghost ranch deserves a decent dinner. I ordered a burger and fries, and while I ate, a few locals trickled in. Betty must have said something because a couple of them glanced my way with curious but not unfriendly expressions. A man in a worn Carhartt jacket stopped by my booth on his way out. Heard you're William's grandson, he said. Good man, your grandfather. Stubborn as hell, but good. Hope you find what you're looking for out there. After dinner, I checked into the motel, a single-story building with doors that opened directly to the parking lot. The room was small but clean, with a bed that didn't sag too much and a television that got 4 channels. I lay on top of the covers, still fully dressed, and stared at the popcorn ceiling. Tomorrow, I'd see the ranch. Tomorrow, I'd know if this was real or just another dead end, but tonight, for the first time in my life, I had a name that belonged to me. Marcus William Cartwright, grandson of William Miller. It felt strange and fragile, like something I could break just by holding it too tightly. If you've made it this far, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. This story is just getting started, and Marcus's journey is about to take him somewhere he never expected. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever discovered something about your family that completely changed how you saw yourself? Maybe you found old letters, or a relative told you a story you'd never heard. I'd love to know what secrets your family has kept, and whether learning them made you feel more connected or more lost. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Let's talk about it in the comments. I woke up before dawn, which wasn't unusual. Years of living in a dormitory where lights came on at 6:30 had trained my body to wake early. But this morning felt different. I wasn't waking up to chores or the noise of other guys getting ready for school. I was waking up with a destination, a purpose that was mine alone. I showered, packed my bags, and checked out of the motel by 7. Betty's place didn't open until 8. So I grabbed a coffee and a pre-wrapped sandwich from the gas station and started walking north along Highway 14. I'd thought about asking someone for a ride, but something made me want to do this alone, to walk the distance and earn whatever I found at the end. The morning was cold, my breath visible in the air, but the sky was clear and endless. The highway was straight and empty, with scrublands stretching out on both sides. Occasionally a pickup truck would pass, and once someone slowed down and asked if I needed a ride, but I waved them on. After about an hour of walking, a truck pulled up beside me and stopped. The window rolled down, and I recognized the man from the diner last night, the one in the Carhartt jacket. "You're not seriously planning to walk 40 miles, are you?" he asked. I shrugged. Didn't have a better plan. He laughed, shaking his head. "Get in." I'm heading up that way anyway to check on my fence line. Name's Tom Crawford. I ranch about 10 miles from where Miller Ranch used to be. I climbed into the passenger seat, grateful for the warmth. Tom was probably in his 50s, with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands gripping the steering wheel. We drove in comfortable silence for a while before he spoke again. Your grandfather was a good neighbor. Helped me out more than once when I was just starting out and didn't know a damn thing about cattle. He was quiet, kept to himself mostly, but if you needed help, he was there. What happened to the ranch? I asked. Tom glanced at me. Life, I guess. William's wife, Catherine, died of cancer back in the 90s. After that, it was just him and Lynn, and they didn't get along so well. Lynn wanted out of this town, wanted something bigger. She left right after high school and William took it hard, threw himself into the work, but ranching alone is brutal. He got older, things started falling apart, and eventually his heart gave out. Found him in the barn one morning. Died doing what he loved, I suppose, but it was a lonely way to go. We turned onto Old Miller Ranch Road, which was barely more than 2 dirt tracks with grass growing down the middle. The truck bounced over ruts and washboard, and I had to grip the door handle to keep from hitting my head on the roof. After about 5 miles, we came to a gate made of weathered wood and rusted wire. A sign hung crooked from the top rail, the words barely visible under years of weather damage, Miller Ranch. Tom put the truck in park. This is as far as I go. My property's back that way. But the ranch house is about a mile down this road. You sure you want to do this? I nodded, grabbing my bags from the back seat. Yeah, I need to see it. He reached into the glove box and pulled out a business card. My number's on there. You get into trouble or need anything, you call. Cell service is spotty out here, but it works sometimes. And Marcus, don't get your hopes up too high, okay? The place has been empty a long time. I thanked him and watched his truck disappear back down the road, leaving me alone at the gate. I pulled out the brass key, but the gate wasn't locked, just held closed by a loop of wire. I unwound it and pushed the gate open, the hinges screaming in protest. Then I shouldered my bags and started walking. The road wound through overgrown pastures where sagebrush and wild grass had reclaimed the land. I could see the remnants of old fence posts, some still standing, others collapsed into the dirt. In the distance, mountains rose up, their peaks still white with snow. The air smelled like sage and dust and something else, something wild that the city had never had. After about 20 minutes, I crested a small rise, and there it was. The ranch house sat in a shallow valley, a single-story structure with faded white siding and a sagging front porch. To the left was a barn, its red paint almost entirely gone, exposing grey wood underneath. There were a few smaller outbuildings, all in various states of decay, and what looked like the remains of a corral, the posts still standing but the rails mostly gone. It wasn't much. Honestly, it looked like the kind of place you'd see in a documentary about ghost towns, but it was mine, or at least it might be. I walked down the slope toward the house, my boots crunching on gravel. The porch steps creaked dangerously under my weight, and I made a mental note to avoid the third one entirely. The front door had a deadbolt, and this time the brass key fit perfectly. The lock was stiff, and I had to work it back and forth, but eventually it turned with a heavy click. The door swung inward, releasing a breath of stale air that smelled like dust and old wood and abandonment. I stepped inside. The interior was dim, lit only by the sunlight, filtering through dirty windows. Dust covered every surface in a thick layer, and cobwebs hung from the corners like tattered curtains. But underneath the neglect I could see the structure of a home. There was a living room with a stone fireplace, a couch and 2 chairs still positioned around it, like people might sit down at any moment. The kitchen had wooden cabinets and an old gas stove, and through a doorway I could see a dining table with 4 chairs. I walked through slowly, my footsteps leaving tracks in the dust. There were 3 bedrooms down a short hallway. The first was small, with just a single bed frame and an empty dresser. The second was larger, clearly the master bedroom, with a bigger bed and a closet with the door hanging off its hinges. But it was the third bedroom that made me stop. The walls were covered in newspaper clippings, magazine cutouts, and photographs, all yellowed with age. I stepped closer, examining them. Most of the clippings were about ranching, cattle prices, rodeo results, high school sports scores. But scattered among them were photographs, pictures of a young girl, maybe 7 or 8, sitting on a horse. The same girl, a few years older, holding a blue ribbon at what looked like a county fair. And then, tucked in the corner, a photograph of a teenage girl holding a baby. The girl looked scared and exhausted, but she was smiling slightly, looking down at the infant in her arms like he was the most important thing in the world. I pulled the photograph off the wall carefully. Written on the back in faded pencil were the words, "Lynn and Marcus, 3 weeks old, my mother and me." I'd never seen a picture of her before, never known what she looked like. But here she was, young and scared and holding me like maybe she didn't want to let go. My throat tightened, and I had to sit down on the dusty floor, still gripping the photograph. I don't know how long I sat there on the floor of that abandoned bedroom, staring at the only photograph I'd ever seen of my mother holding me. The sunlight shifted across the wall, illuminating dust particles floating in the air like tiny stars, and I tried to imagine what her life had been like in this house, in this town, carrying a baby she didn't know how to keep. Eventually, I stood up and explored the rest of the room more carefully. There was a wooden trunk at the foot of the bed, the kind with leather straps and brass corners that looked like it had survived generations. I knelt beside it and lifted the lid, which opened with surprising ease. Inside were more photographs, dozens of them, documenting what looked like my grandfather's entire life. Wedding photos showing a young William Miller and a beautiful woman in a simple white dress. Pictures of them working the ranch together, standing beside cattle, sitting on the porch with coffee cups. Then photos of Lynn as a baby, as a toddler, growing up in this house. But there was something else at the bottom of the trunk. A large leather journal, its cover cracked and worn from years of handling. I lifted it out carefully and opened it to the first page. William Miller's ranch journal. It read in neat handwriting. Started January 1978. I flipped through the pages, which were filled with entries about weather patterns, cattle sales, equipment repairs, and the daily rhythms of ranch life. But scattered throughout were more personal entries, and those were what caught my attention. June 15th, 1987. Catherine's cancer is back. Doctors say 6 months, maybe less. Don't know how to tell Lynn. She's only 12, still needs her mother. Don't know how to be enough for her on my own. March 3rd, 1988. Catherine passed this morning. Held her hand until the end. Lynn won't come out of her room. I don't have the words to make this better. I turned more pages, watching years pass in brief entries. October 22nd, 1993. Lynn's talking about leaving after graduation. Says there's nothing for her here. I tried to tell her this ranch will be hers someday, that it's her legacy, but she just looks at me like I'm speaking a foreign language. Maybe I am. May 8th, 1994. Lynn's pregnant. She told me tonight, crying, saying she's sorry. Sorry, like I have any right to judge. I was angry at first, I won't lie. But then I saw how scared she was, and all I wanted was to help. Told her we'd figure it out together. She didn't believe me. July 30th, 1994. Lynn left last night. Took some clothes in the truck and just disappeared. Left a note saying she couldn't stay here, couldn't raise a baby in a place that felt like a grave. She's not wrong. Since Catherine died, this place has felt more like a memorial than a home. I failed them both. My hands trembled as I read. William had wanted to help. He'd wanted Lynn to stay, but she'd run anyway, just like I'd thought. I kept reading, watching my grandfather's heartbreak unfold in careful handwriting. September 19th, 1994. Got a call from a social worker in the city. Lynn had a boy. Named him Marcus. She gave him up to the state. The social worker wouldn't tell me where he is. Said it's a closed case. I asked if I could take him, raise him here. They said I'm too old, that a 72-year-old man living alone on a failing ranch isn't a suitable guardian. Maybe they're right, but he's my grandson, my blood, and I can't even meet him. That entry was dated just a few months after I was born. William had tried to get me. He'd wanted me, but the system had decided he wasn't good enough, the same way it had decided so many things about my life without asking what I wanted. The entries continued, growing more sporadic as the years passed. February 11, 2001. Set up a trust today with the lawyer in Ridgemont. Put the ranch and what little money I have into it. Designated for Marcus William Cartwright if he ever comes looking. Paid the property taxes forward as far as I could afford. I don't know if he'll ever see this place, but if he does, at least he'll know he came from somewhere. That someone thought about him. August 3rd, 2009. Not feeling well. Heart's giving out, I think. Doc says I should move to town, get care, but I'm not leaving this ranch. If I'm going to die, it'll be here, where I lived my whole life. I just hope Marcus finds his way here someday. Hope he understands that his mother loved him, even if she didn't know how to show it. And hope he knows I would have taken him if they'd let me. The final entry was dated August 17th, 2009. Just 3 lines. Getting harder to breathe. But the sunrise this morning was beautiful. If today's the day, at least I got to see one more. That was it. No dramatic final words, just a man acknowledging another morning on the land he loved. Tom had said William died in the barn, which meant he'd probably written that entry and then gone out to do chores. The same routine he'd followed for decades, and his heart had finally given out. I closed the journal and sat there in the empty bedroom, surrounded by the ghosts of people I'd never met but who had shaped my entire existence. Lynn, who'd been too young and too scared and too broken by grief to be anyone's mother. William, who'd tried to hold everything together and had died alone, hoping a grandson he'd never met might someday understand. I wanted to be angry at them. For years, I'd imagined my birth parents as villains, people who'd thrown me away like garbage. But the truth was more complicated and somehow sadder. They'd been broken people trying their best and failing, just like everyone else. I spent the rest of the day exploring the property. The barn was in rough shape, the roof had several holes, and birds had nested in the rafters. But the basic structure was still sound. There were old tools hanging on the walls, rusted but potentially salvageable. A workbench covered in ancient sawdust, and in the back corner, covered with a tarp, I found a pickup truck. It was a 1985 Ford, faded blue, with flat tires and a layer of dust so thick I had to wipe the windshield to see inside. But the keys were in the ignition. I tried turning it over, not expecting anything, and was shocked when the engine actually turned, coughing and sputtering before dying. It had been sitting for 15 years, but maybe, with some work, it could run again. The outbuildings were mostly empty, just remnants of ranch equipment and coils of wire and empty feed sacks. But behind the barn, I found a windmill, its blades frozen in place, but the well beneath it still intact. I pulled up a bucket of water, and it came up clear and cold. The well still worked. As the sun started to set, painting the mountains in shades of orange and purple, I sat on the porch steps and took stock. The ranch was a mess. The house needed repairs, the barn needed a new roof, the fences were mostly gone, and I had no idea how to do any of it. I had about $270 left to my name, no job, and no experience with any of this. But I also had something I'd never had before. I had a place, a history, a name that meant something. Marcus William Cartwright, grandson of William Miller, son of Lynn. It wasn't much, but it was mine. That first night in the ranch house, I slept on the old couch in the living room, wrapped in the blue towel I'd been found in, and a musty blanket I'd discovered in a closet. Every sound made me jolt awake. The wind rattling the windows, the house settling and creaking, something that might have been an animal moving around outside. But despite the strangeness of it all, I felt safer than I had in years. Maybe it was knowing that nobody could tell me to leave, that for the first time in my life I was somewhere I had a right to be. When morning came, I made a plan. I walked back to town, which took about 2 hours, and used some of my remaining money to buy basic supplies at the hardware store. Cleaning products, a few tools, work gloves, and some canned food. The woman at the register, who introduced herself as Paula, asked if I was the Miller kid. Word traveled fast in small towns. When I confirmed it, she knocked 15% off my total without me asking and told me to come back if I needed anything else. On the way out of town, I stopped at Betty's place for breakfast. Betty saw me through the window and waved me inside. "How was the ranch?" she asked, pouring coffee before I'd even sat down. "Rough," I admitted, "but it's there. It's real." She nodded knowingly. "Your grandfather kept that place running on determination and stubbornness for years. Sounds like maybe you've got some of that in you too." Over the next few weeks, I fell into a routine. I'd wake up early and work on the house, scrubbing years of dust and grime, patching holes in the walls, replacing broken window panes with materials I bought on credit at the hardware store after Paula vouched for me. Tom Crawford stopped by a few times, bringing supplies and teaching me basic repairs. He showed me how to fix a fence post, how to check the windmill mechanism, and how to tell if water lines were still functional. Other neighbors appeared too, people whose names I struggled to remember at first. They'd heard William's grandson had come back, and they showed up with offers of help. Someone brought me a working refrigerator their family was replacing. Someone else dropped off a load of firewood for the stove. A woman named Susan, who'd apparently been friends with my grandmother Catherine, came by with home-cooked meals twice a week, refusing to take no for an answer. I also spent time with William's journal, reading it cover to cover multiple times. Through his words, I got to know the man who'd wanted me, but couldn't have me. He wrote about droughts and harsh winters, about cattle that died and crops that failed, but also about sunrises that took his breath away and the satisfaction of a hard day's work. He wrote about missing Catherine every single day, and about watching Lynn grow into someone he didn't quite understand, but loved fiercely anyway. And scattered throughout were brief mentions of me, wondering where I was, what I looked like, whether I was happy. He'd created the trust in 2001, which meant he'd spent the last 8 years of his life knowing I might never find this place, but hoping anyway. One afternoon in early April, about 6 weeks after I'd arrived, I was working on repairing the porch railing when a car pulled up. A woman stepped out, probably in her 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked nervous, like she wasn't sure she should be there. "Are you Marcus?" she asked, staying near her car. I set down my hammer and wiped my hands on my jeans. "Yeah. Can I help you?" She hesitated, then reached into her car and pulled out a folder. "My name is Jennifer Cole. I'm a lawyer in Billings. I handled William Miller's estate when he passed. When Tom Crawford mentioned you'd shown up, I thought you should have these." She handed me the folder, and I opened it carefully. Inside were official-looking documents, a property deed listing Marcus William Cartwright as the owner of Miller Ranch, dated and notarized, tax records showing payments made through 2025, just like my mother's note had said, and a bank statement for an account I didn't know existed, showing a balance of $8,300. "What is this?" I asked, staring at the numbers. Jennifer smiled slightly. "William set up the trust to transfer automatically if you ever came forward with proof of identity. The property is legally yours, has been since you turned 18. The account was funded by selling off his cattle and equipment before he died. He wanted to make sure you'd have something to start with if you claimed the ranch. I've been managing it for years, hoping you'd show up. $8,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more money than I'd ever imagined having. It was enough to make real repairs, to buy materials, maybe even to get the truck running. Why didn't anyone try to find me? I asked. She shook her head. William tried. He hired investigators, called social services, but your records were sealed. He was told that unless you initiated contact, there was no legal way to reach you, so he did the only thing he could. He left you a trail and hoped you'd follow it. After Jennifer left, I sat on the porch steps and looked out at the property. 4,700 acres of rocky pasture, a house that barely qualified as livable, a barn held together by hope and stubbornness, and enough money to maybe, possibly make something of it. I thought about William spending the last years of his life preparing for a grandson he might never meet. I thought about Lynn, who'd been too broken to keep me, but had still left me the key. And I thought about myself, a kid who'd spent 19 years believing he came from nothing, only to discover he came from people who'd loved him in the only ways they knew how. That evening, I walked out to the spot behind the barn, where Tom had told me William and Catherine were buried. Simple wooden crosses marked their graves, the names barely visible after years of weather. I stood there for a long time, not really knowing what to say. Finally, I just said, "I'm here. I made it. And I'm going to take care of this place, I promise." The wind picked up, carrying the smell of sage and distant rain. Somewhere in the hills, a coyote howled, and for the first time in my entire life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Over the following months, the ranch slowly came back to life. I got the truck running with help from a mechanic in town. I repaired the barn roof and reinforced the structure. I started rebuilding fences, one section at a time, learning as I went. Tom taught me about water rights and grazing permits, about the rhythms of ranching that William had known instinctively. I enrolled in online courses about ranch management and sustainable agriculture, studying at night by lamplight because the internet connection was terrible. I made mistakes, plenty of them. I bought the wrong materials, built things that fell apart, and spent money on equipment I didn't actually need. But I kept going because giving up would mean William's sacrifice had been for nothing. It would mean the trail Lynn had left me had led nowhere, and I wasn't about to let that happen. By the time winter arrived, the house was warm and functional. I'd installed a wood stove that actually worked, insulated the walls, and even got the plumbing running again. The ranch wasn't profitable yet, might not be for years, but it was home, and that was enough. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit in William's old chair by the fireplace and read his journal again, feeling connected to him in a way I'd never felt connected to anyone. We'd never met, never spoken, but we shared this land, this legacy, this stubborn refusal to give up even when everything seemed impossible. I wasn't the kid who'd left Oak Ridge Boys home anymore. I was Marcus William Cartwright, rancher, grandson, keeper of a promise made across years and distance by people who'd never stopped hoping I'd find my way home, and I had. Thank you so much for sticking with Marcus through his journey. If this story touched something in you, I'd be really grateful if you'd subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep sharing these stories about people searching for where they belong, about families that exist even when they're broken, about the trails we follow hoping they'll lead us home. I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever found something from your past that changed how you saw your whole life? Maybe it was a letter, a photograph, or a conversation that suddenly made everything make sense. Or maybe you're still searching, still following your own trail of breadcrumbs, hoping it leads somewhere real. Share your story with this community. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today, might give them the courage to keep searching or the peace to accept what they find. And tell me, what's the biggest lesson you're taking away from Marcus's story? For me, it's that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes it's a grandfather preparing a ranch for a grandson he'll never meet. Sometimes it's a mother leaving a key because she can't leave anything else. Sometimes it's a town full of strangers who become family because that's what people do when someone needs help. Whatever your story is, wherever your trail is leading you, I hope you keep following it, because you deserve to know where you come from. You deserve to find your way home. Until next time, take care of yourselves and remember that you're part of something bigger than you know.